And we are back on the build phase. I'm mrben, and today I'm going to run an experiment. And if you're hearing this, it means the experiment worked. If you're not hearing this, it means I'm just talking to myself because this idea was dumb. So what I have here is the Versus TCG browser pulled up on my computer. I also have a D6, and I'm going to roll this D6, and I'm going to get a 5. So I'm going to go over here to cost on the TCG browser, and I'm going to get a 5. Now I'm going to roll the die again, and we got a 3 on the attack. So let's go to 3. Oh, there's not many cards left now. All right, so let's roll for defense. We got a 4, and that wipes everybody out. Okay, so we have to reject the 4. We got a 4 again. Okay, this might not see the light of day. That was 3 4s in a row. What is happening right now? Okay, let's try this one more time. And 6. All right, so do we have a 5 6? We do. That leaves us with exactly 1 card. Okay, so today on the Build Phase podcast, we are going to talk about the 5-cost Madarin villain affiliated card from way back in the day. This card came out in the base set, I think. I actually have not looked at this. Yes, this came out in the base set. So this is the card we're going to talk about today. Before we do that, though, I want to give a shout out to all my patrons. If you want to join the coolest clubhouse in Versus, patreon.com/thebuildphase. All right, the Madarin. This guy has never seen that much play. Although one might argue he's a more playable card now than he was back in the day when the base set came out. So let's go over the card first. He is a 3/6/1 with range, and again, he costs 5. He has multiple superpowers here. They are all main phase powers. I am not going to say this right. The Makluan rings. Okay, you pay a yellow and you can draw a card. Yikes. Pay a red, choose an enemy player to discard a card. Main phase, they're all main phase, sorry. Pay a green, put a +1 counter on a character, or pay a blue and put a -1 counter on a character. Literally every power on this card, there is an example of another card that does this better. Now, I do think existing in a world where we have things like the Nexus of all realities, we now have Kane, we have kind of ways to manipulate the resource row, you could get more mileage out of this guy. If he's on board and you play a Monarch and you can do all 4 of these in one turn, drawing an extra card, forcing a discard. Does it say random? It is not random. Oh my goodness. They were so afraid that this guy was going to be good. However, we've seen so many characters that you pay a blue and can put 3 -1 counters on something, or pay a blue and put 4 -1 counters on something if you commit a latent mutation to it. Might makes right is essentially the same case on the green part of the Makluan. Man, I should have looked that up. Well, I didn't know. I had no way to look it up. The rings. So all these effects, I'm sure when they printed this card in the base set, and there was a time in the base set where I definitely kind of looked at this guy. Oh, he's so flexible. You don't necessarily have to have all 4 colors in your deck, but whatever your deck's in, you get 1 hit point with a 3/6 stat line. Just was never good on turn 5. It never even came close to being good. And a lot of characters prove that if the stat line is bad enough, it doesn't matter how good the power is. Now, there are some aberrations throughout the history of Versus where there's characters that have particularly horrendous stat lines, but they still see some play because the powers are that good. Recent card feature we did on the show was talking about Kobik, which is an example of exactly that. Unfortunately, the Madarin, his powers are just not good enough. So, okay, here's what I'm going to do. If this card came out today, how would we fix him? What would we? Well, first of all, I think 2 health is totally reasonable, particularly for the villain team. One of the things that the villain team stood out from the other teams in the base box in particular is they had more multi-health characters than any team. Maybe even some only. I think they had some of the only, like, was Abomination 3 health? I think he might have been. So it's been a long time since I played with a lot of these base set cards to where I don't have the stats totally memorized anymore. But nonetheless, one of the features of the team is that they had more durable characters than the other three teams that were in that box. Giving this guy at least one more hit point feels completely reasonable. Honestly, for turn 5, I could see if, let's say we can't change his stats. Let's say his stats have to be bad because just making the numbers bigger is a little bit boring. You know, you can make him a 7/7 with range, and that would probably be 7/7/2 with range and leave the powers alone. But that's kind of boring. Let's make the powers cooler. Let's say pay yellow and you get to draw 2 cards. So instead of just cycling a location for one extra card, you actually go up on card advantage. And let's say it's discard a random card instead of choose. Maybe that could be discard two. No, discarding 2 cards for one would be way too good. That's completely unacceptable. So we make that a random card. Now, since we're putting so much flexibility into this, kind of redoing this old card, trying to, how far can we go? I think the typical pay a power to get 3 -1 counters or 3 +1 counters on something, we've seen that put on a lot of cards, like particularly pay a blue for 3 -1 counters. But with all the other things this guy's capable of doing, it seems like that would be too much. So I think the green and the blue power on Mandarin, maybe only let's go to 2. I think paying 1 might location for 1 +1 counter is absolutely unacceptable. That's just a terrible trade. You would never do that. And again, if we're assuming that we're going to keep his stats 3/6 range, we'll give him 2 health, so he could potentially use these powers twice. That could be cool. So we want to juice the power a little bit because his stats are really pretty bad for the drop, but we don't want it to be so crazy that he's just completely out of control. So I think both the might and the energy powers go up to 2 counters. So pay a blue for 2 -1s or pay a green for 2 +1s. The skill power becomes discard a random card, and the yellow power, man, that could almost be draw 3. Probably should only be draw 2. And that, I think, like, if Super Awesome Games was going to print this card today, I think something along that power level is more like what they would do. Maybe even leave him at 1 health and make it draw 3 cards, enemy player discards 2, 3 counters and 3 counters. Because then he's super fragile. I think you'd almost have to make his stats even worse. Like, he'd have to be like a 3/3 to get away with that kind of power level. But that would be a little bit more interesting. So normally when I do these deck highlights, I talk about the decks that these cards fit into or the counterplay that you could have against this guy. I mean, yeah, the counter, he's a stat line of a 3-drop on turn 5. That's the counterplay against this guy. Just stun him and get rid of him. With only 1 health, he's not going to stick around. As far as the powers, if your opponent's able to put 4 locations into doing all of these things, yes, you're down on card advantage by 2, but you get to choose the discard, and the +1 -1 is, I don't feel bad about it. If my opponent is paying a whole location to put a single +1 counter on one of their cards, I do not care. I feel great. That feels like please use your resources that way. That means that that might location, that fortress cannot be used for might makes right, for instance, or 100,000 other crazy powerful effects. Same thing with a blue. Like, if you're paying the blue to put a single minus, I don't need to go through the whole dramatic list of examples, but those principles apply. So again, it's normally I talk about where these cards fit in. This guy has never really fit in anywhere, and I like to talk about how to play against it. So rather than that, I decided to get under the hood on this card and actually try to tune him up to modern day standards. And I think increasing the powers is the cooler way to go rather than changing his stats. So again, pay a yellow, draw 2 cards, pay a red, discard a random, green for 2 +1s, blue for 2 -1s, and maybe he gets 2 health. I think he should get 2 health. Yeah, so that's how I'd fix Mandarin and his Makluan rings. I wish I could say that cool, like Makluan. Oh, I bet that's what it is. Makluan rings. All right, until next time, go win some games.